But anyway, interactive editing is different than interactive writing, but they both have their place. And if you give yourself permission to just slow down and camp out with interactive editing, what I typically did, now think back to when we taught you about format, the conceptual unit planning and how you start a unit. We planned units together. I said I always start with an anchor, read aloud, that really just gets at the concept and the content of the topic. Okay. And then we go from there to the anchor shared reading. It's that anchor shared reading that you're going to use to do your interactive editing. And if you wrote that anchor shared reading to just really address those standards, that they sit situated squarely on the standards, then you don't have to worry that it might take you a week to 2 weeks to do this, because the conversation that goes with this, I guarantee you, they know the topic much better than if you had gone through a lot of different activities. So it would often take me a week to 2 weeks to go through a shared reading / interactive editing, and depending on the grade level. But the conversation is where the power is. The conversation is what builds up their oral language, because they're talking using the vocabulary of that content area. So if we're talking about science or a social studies shared reading, and you're looking for the most important words, which she's going to tell you about in a minute, those vocabulary words are rolling off your students' tongues, and they're having to use them purposefully. So I think it's worthy of a dissertation study, actually. What I saw in my students, they understood cohesion of text, they understood conventions of print, they understood the topic and the content. They understood also their vocabulary grew, and they became more fluid in their nonfiction report writing. It just doesn't get any better. So having said all that, I'll turn it over to you, but I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to stay right in the middle of this with her.
Well, hey guys, I'm Brittany, if you guys don't know me, and I would like to start out with saying that I'm not a pro at this, and there's a lot of areas. I was talking with like Jenny and some other people. I was like, I just kind of dedicated my time towards this. I thought that it was worth doing, and so I'm still like learning how to teach math and how to do Project Lead the Way and everything else on top of it. So I don't want you guys to be discouraged if you're like, I'm not doing this in my class, I'm not doing interactive writing or whatever. This is just something that has worked for me in my class, and you can kind of take it as you need for yours. So one thing that I started out with, after talking with Dr. Martin, I was like, hey, I'm just gonna dive into interactive editing. Like, I'm just gonna try it, and if it's absolutely terrible and I fail at it, that's okay. So the first part, and you can kind of follow along on the handout for more details, but
not my stapled one, but hers is the one that
there's like a little asterisk on the bottom. And so I just started out like with this optional lesson. You don't even have, it's not really, wasn't even really a lesson, but I was trying to introduce my class to the telegraph, and I talked about how like nowadays you can just pick up the phone and call someone, or you can even like write them a letter. But back then, if you were sending them an important message to the telegraph, then like you would have to choose the most important words. You couldn't send a paragraph because you wouldn't have enough money. So my mom's class in Texas and my class were doing pen pal letters. And so I gave them an example of that text in blue. I was like, if this was my message that I was trying to send to my mom, my class finished their pen pal letters and I will be sending them to you this weekend. If that's the message that I'm trying to send to my mom, but I'm doing it through the telegraph, and I can only, you know, it's like $1 per word, what are going to be the most important words that we can keep in the message so that my mom knows what we're saying? So we narrowed it down to 8 words, and then we narrowed it down to these last 5. Sending pal letters this weekend. And so that was just like a quick kind of like intro lesson that we did for one day, just that so that they could see that words like my or and or I or be, like words like that, they're not going to be the most important. The most important are going to be like the sending pal letters.
So how did you get them there? Did you take them one, so you read it, you made sure you understood it, and then you went through one word at a time and crossed out the words you didn't want? Or?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I know that we read it several times together, and then what I started kind of doing was like, okay, you think about it in your head, what you think is the most important words, like from that first chunk. I think I did for my class finish their pen pal letters, that part. So I had to think about it in their head, and then I said, okay, now turn and tell your partner the most important words that you were thinking of and why. And it was just interesting, like even like a little lesson like that, like they were already like, I don't think that the word my is that important. I think class is important. They were already kind of like having this big discussion about it. And then after they talked about it with each other, then we turned back as a group and we talked about it. And so I would just listen to a few people, and like they couldn't just say, oh, I want the word class. Like you have to say why. You'd have to kind of defend it. And we had just done like persuasion letters. And so I was like, hey, you have to persuade me why that's an important word. And so I would hear some of their feedback, and eventually, like, I think even at the beginning, I kind of gave them some examples, like, okay, the word my, that's not going to be a very important word. Like, we want to have a word that's going to be really about the main message. So I like to kind of follow that pattern. I would say, okay, you think of the most important words in your head, turn and tell your partner what you're thinking, and then we would share it as a whole group.
And one of the things you can do is ask them which words put a picture in your head. If they don't put a clear picture in your head, it's probably not too important.
Yeah. And so that's the final word that we did. And I mean, the final sentence. And so we talked about how that would be $5. And up here, that was $17. And now we narrowed it down to the most important words without losing the message. So we read these last 5 words that we chose. And then we checked to make sure that like the meaning and the message was still there. So that was just like an optional lesson that you can do to kind of get them used to picking the most important words. So I decided to use this nonfiction text. It was about earthworms. We had been learning about earthworms in global gardens, and my kids like loved it. And so I was like, you know, why not? I just chose this, and it was a level M text, which is where second graders are supposed to be at the end of the year. And I just thought, you know what, we'll just use this one, and we'll just hopefully that will help them kind of get there. So the first part of the lesson, you want to read it for maybe 1 or 2 days for comprehension. I think we spent 2 days on this. We just read it as a shared reading, and we talked about like, what is the author saying in this text? Why did they write it? What do these words mean? And then you decide which part of the text hangs together. And so this is kind of a phrase that I was like, I'm not even really sure what that means, but like my kids got it right away. But, yeah, I know. I was like actually impressed. I was like, wow, maybe. I know. I'm just like up there like pretending like I know what I'm doing. So I mean, because I just wrote down the lesson that Dr. Martin said, and I just kind of said it verbatim, and I was like, which chunk hangs together? And they got it. So usually like a chunk is usually it's going to be like a paragraph. It's not always, but here in this paragraph, we read it. And we decided that the author was mainly talking about tunnels. So that section is going to hang together because they're talking about earthworms tunnels specifically. Then it's kind of hard to tell over here, but first it went from earthworms all the way down here to light. That paragraph did. But after we read it, we decided that this last sentence, they avoid bright light, it didn't go with that green chunk right here. This chunk was kind of talking about earthworms' bodies. And then this red one, it was talking about their behavior and their characteristics. And it was interesting because, I mean, this is only the second day we were doing it. And my kids were like, with this last sentence, it talks about how earthworms use their mouths to pull dead leaves into their tunnels. We had this huge conversation of whether we should put it over here with tunnels in this section, or if we should move it up to the part where it talks about the earthworm's body, since it was talking about its mouth. So it's just kind of like an interesting conversation. And we had kind of like this big debate, and usually, like just like in interactive writing or in any other whole group thing, you as a teacher have to kind of be the referee and be like, all right, it's going in this section. And a lot of kids were upset, but I was like, in your own writing, you can put that in your section, whatever. So
we call that cohesion of text, and that is a very sophisticated topic. And she's got her second graders grappling with it, and they may not have known the label, but that's what they're doing. And talk about deep comprehension. This is it.
Yeah, it was actually like really cool to see, and how like, I mean, while some kids struggle with it, I mean, I had a lot of like even my lower kids, like they were the ones who were like, no, that sentence should go over here, it should go over there, and it's just like good conversations to have. So again, for the first and second days, you're reading it for comprehension and then deciding which parts of the text hang together. Then we used this text as shared reading. We decided it was a nonfiction genre, and we gave reasons why. And, we gave like the typical reasons, but I just thought it was interesting that one of the reasons they gave was that it hangs together, which was just like, it's like we had never talked about that until this lesson. And I was like, okay, yeah, sometimes in fiction it does too, but that was just interesting to have that on there. So use it as shared reading just so that they can keep, getting familiar with the words. Then I think this is on the 3rd or 4th day. After you've chosen which sections, which chunks stay together, then you're going to choose the most important words from the first chunk. So going back to the telegraph, you're not going to pick all those 17 words. You're going to choose the most important words that hold meaning from what the author is saying. So I showed them this picture, and it just says, choose the most important words from the first section. And so this was the section that we did. And I read it sentence by sentence. You read the sentence together, and then I would read it out loud, and I'd be like, hey, just think about it in your head. What are maybe 1 or 2 of the most important words in this sentence? After I give them time to think about it, because I'll be raising my hand, I was like, no, just think about it, and then turn and talk with your partner why. And after they turn and talk with their partner, then we would come back as a whole group, and we would do that for every sentence. So I would cross out the words that weren't the most important, and then just circle or highlight the words that were. So the words that we chose in this first part were earthworms. Obviously, we were like, that's what the whole paper is about. And then we chose tunnels and underground. And even that was a conversation. Like some of my kids were like, you don't have to have underground because tunnels are always underground. And then someone else was like, no, like there's like trains and they're in tunnels and they're above ground. And like, it was just a funny conversation. So after you choose, after we said, okay, earthworms, and I was like, yeah, I agree. That's a very important word. And I circled it. I would then write that word earthworms. I would write it over on the anchor chart. And in this part, you're the one who's doing the writing because you're just copying it over. And so I would just say that word earthworms, move it over there, and kind of move on to the next words. So we did that sentence by sentence for that first section. And
may I interrupt?
Yeah, of course.
You're building habits of thinking in your kids. Everything you do needs to be so purposeful so that when you're working yourself out of a job, remember we've talked about that, and you're instilling in them habits of thinking. So you don't want to just look at this paragraph and say, what's the most important keywords? But notice how she said, she took it a sentence at a time and methodically went through it. This is where you just roll up your sleeves, have those conversations, and that's why you want to make sure that this text is worth reading. That's why you want to use an anchor shared reading for your unit. But if it sits right in the middle of your unit standards, you can afford to take the time to camp out there and go through this process methodically. Because then they're also going to be able to start writing reports on their own.
Yeah, and that's what I told my class. I was like, guys, this is stuff that you're going to be doing in high school and in college. Maybe like you didn't do it that way, but I mean, this is essentially kind of what a research paper is. Or, I thought it was interesting, and they always love hearing that they're doing college stuff. So we don't have to watch the video, but you can watch just a little bit of it.
Remember we talked about the telegraph, and they would have to pay at least $1 for every single word. So these are the words that we decided were the absolute most important words in those first 2 sentences. Now, why did we draw a circle around this, or a shape around it, Kira? It hangs together, right? It's all talking about the same thing. What is this section talking about? David? Okay, more specifically, they're what? Tunnels, right? Talking about their tunnels. So let's go ahead and read this next sentence. How do I know when the next sentence starts? Mia?
When there's a capital letter.
Right, what's that first capital letter?
T.
Right? How do I know when it ends, Mia?
When there's a period.
When there's a period.
I was surprised that no one knew.
Here's that period. So let's read this next sentence. And you are looking for the most important word. Ready? Go. The tunnels also help earthworms hide from hungry animals. So think about that in your head. Are we going to be choosing 3 or 4 words? No. Try to just choose maybe 1 word from the sentence. Oh, think about it in your head. The tunnels also help earthworms hide from hungry animals. We already have earthworms. We already have tunnels. So I'm going to go ahead and cross those out. I'm going to cross out tunnels and earthworms.
I talked about with them is like we already have the word earthworms. You don't have to write it.
That's really important. That gets back to anapra, where we start using pronouns for the nouns, and it's scary if you ask your kids what he or it or they stands for. They're not tracking well. This helps with that.
So again, you saw that we just read that sentence together. I read it one more time for them and said, think about it in your head. And people would always raise their hand. I was like, no, just think about it. And then they're going to turn it on.
We think that $. Is a really important word. We're not going to pay $1 for that one. What about also?
Yeah.
Is it going to be more important than the other one? No. So I'm also going to cross out little
Help.
I'm thinking from for sure we don't need that one. So these are your choices. Oh, you're right. We're going to the next sentence. We're looking at help, hide, hungry animals. There's your 4 choices. Think about in your head what 1 word or 2 words you would have to keep. Think about your head. Now turn and tell your partner the words you're thinking.
So I just crossed out some of the words that were like a little bit shorter at the beginning whenever you were doing it, just to kind of help them see which words you can kind of like automatically get rid of, but the words that you want to keep. So there's more videos.
So that's determining importance, main idea. How do you get at that usually in the classroom? I mean, this is so embedded, you know. And look at the oral language support for high ELL population.
Yeah, over half of my class is ELL. So it was just really interesting to hear, even whenever they were giving me their reasoning, they would like use the vocabulary words to kind of defend themselves. So these are the words that we chose from that first section. And then after you have those important words, then it goes back into interactive writing. So you interactively write a sentence using the most important words from the first chunk. And so a lot of my kids, they would try to just use those important words. They'd be like, it doesn't make any sense, like earthworms, underground tunnels. And I was like, no, we're going to add in other words. Like we have those most important words, but you have to add in, you know, some verbs and everything like that. So I went ahead and just cut them out, and that way we wouldn't have to rewrite them. But looking back, I probably would have just done the interactive writing sentence on a piece of paper, like on an anchor chart. That way they can kind of have it, because the words are kind of getting everywhere. But all right, you live and you learn. And after we had those most important words, I think that day, like we didn't have enough time to really start writing the sentence. So I just said, okay, like go grab a board, go grab a piece of paper, and you can write your own sentences using those most important words. And I mean, everyone went. And even like one of my students, she only like can write like a couple of words. Like she was using the most important words that we had, and she was kind of like trying to make a sentence with it. And so they all, Mrs. Marcus, he's one of the kids who he was writing like paragraphs. But they just all went and they were writing all these sentences about what we had just read, and they were using those vocabulary words. And I thought it was just going to be kind of like a quick little thing, but they really loved it.
And so don't race through it. The power of this is in the process. And Linda Dorn will tell you out of her research that the best comprehension happens when you write in response to reading. So by having her go back and have those kids write, but she's scaffolding them with those key words. So all of a sudden it's doable. Remember Camboard's conditions for learning. It's purposeful, doable, and there's choice. I have a choice of how I want to write my sentences. They don't have to be a copy of sentence off the board type of thing. And it's also teaching them the conventions of a sentence. Again, think of that for your ELLs as well as all the rest of our second graders.
Yeah. So this is the sentence that we wrote. I can't remember if it took us 1 or 2 days, but I have the most important words on above this so that way we could see it. And so we wrote, earthworms hide underground in tunnels to protect themselves from sunlight and animal attacks. So that was kind of the sentence that we wrote from that. But it wasn't just like, oh, we quickly write this. I mean, we had a lot of conversation about how to word it, and like some people are kind of getting mad at their sentence didn't get picked. And but it was just interesting to hear how everyone was kind of bringing different ideas, and we had a whole conversation about what the first word should be in that sentence, and we were saying that it should be earthworms because that's what the whole paper is about. Like that's kind of like the main topic. And we had just conversations about how that we could combine sunlight and animal attacks. So it was like, you can kind of look at this and be like, oh cool, they wrote a sentence, but there's so much conversation that went into every word. And then while we were doing that, you can pull in the phonics piece. You can talk about, is this a noun? Is this an adjective? Whatever you guys are kind of focusing on during that time. So those are the most important words that we had. Then you interactively write a sentence using the most important words from the first chunk. And then you repeat that same process with the next chunk or with the next section. So we had this next section where it talked about their body. And then we went sentence by sentence, talking about which words are going to be the most important, which words we don't need. And so these are the words that we chose from that.
Talk about close reading, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we cut on some of it. We had to go word by word, and sometimes if we were kind of unsure, like because whenever I started talking about like they don't have ears, they don't have eyes, they don't have whatever else it was, we weren't sure if we were going to need that or not. And so I said, okay, like I'll just put it over here on the anchor chart with the most important words, and if we decide we don't need it, then we can get rid of it. So sometimes if you're like, I don't, because sometimes I was like, I don't really know if that's like the most important word, and I was like, I'll just write it over here, and if we need it later, then we'll use it, and if not, that's fine. And then again, you use those most important words to interactively write a sentence about that chunk. So in this one, we wrote 2 sentences, and right after today on this one, I wrote the words, just looking back, I was like, I would have had them write it, but I was just trying to help them kind of talk more about the meaning. And so after we wrote the sentence, we said, earthworms have special skin that can sense light and movements. They drag dead plants underground to eat. As soon as we read that, one of our girls was like, that does not make sense. Like, that does not flow together. And I was like, it's okay, it's okay. But I mean, I had a lot of kids who were like, that doesn't really sound very good. Like, that doesn't really go together. And I was like, okay, well, let's keep our sentences for now. And at the very end, we're going to put them all together. So I had some students just rewrite them onto sentence strips. And we really struggled with that last sentence, and it was time for spring break, so I just wrote that last one.
Do what you have to do, right?
So those are the 2 sentences that we got from that second chunk. Then this one is the final sentence that we got from the final section. Earthworms look for food at night, so they are night crawlers.
Look at the conventions of printer learning.
Yeah, we even talked about the like quotation marks. And so I was like, whenever you say it, you can kind of go night crawlers like that. And again, like one of my lowest students, she had to go take like the STAR test, or I don't know, just testing for ELLs or something. I don't know what it was. But the monitor, she came back and she was like, oh, Miss Hamilton, like your class must really be learning about I can't even remember what called the things, quotation marks. I was gonna say apostrophes, and I'm like, hey, whatever, the double apostrophes. But she came back and she like pointed at my student. She was the only one who knew what that was, like the dialogue tags and like all that kind of stuff. And I mean and she's like my lowest student, and it was just really cool to see that. So after we have all of the sentences from those 3 parts, then you can combine all of the sentences together, then revise and edit where needed. So this is the part where I was like shocked. Okay, now don't be impressed by the topic and the conclusion sentence. I wrote it for this time because we kind of just talked about it, but I'll get to that in a second. Whenever we put those 4 sentences together that we had from all of the sections, I didn't really know what I was doing. I just kind of put it up there and was like, all right, what do you guys think? And like we read it together. And at first it was just kind of like, I mean, it's brand new to them. Like they've never had these conversations. I've never had these conversations. And so we had to kind of like work through it together. But I had one of my students who, again, she's like one of my lowest students. And she like, she was trying to tell me where the sentences should go. And she's like, can I stand up and get the pointer? I was like, yeah, sure. You know, so she like gets the pointer and she's like, I think that this sentence, it was the one about, earthworms have special skin. I think it's like, she's like, I think it should go down here. And like, she was moving it all around. And some other kids were like, what? No, we don't agree with that and everything. And, but like what she was saying was so good. Like, I mean, just like to hear her like reasoning and her thoughts behind it and her thinking behind it, like to even be able to say, no, that sentence should be moved up here and then these two should be together. And I mean, my class kind of got in an argument about it because they were arguing and like they were like, they didn't agree with what she was saying. And so she started crying. I felt really bad for her. But I told her, but she was so upset. But then I had a conversation about it and I was like, guys, like it's okay to like disagree with someone. I was like, but I mean, I said her name and I was like, you guys don't even understand like the level of thinking that she has right now. I was like, that's a gift to have. And so she like felt really proud after that. But I was like, honestly, I was like, I'm so impressed by like your reasoning and your thinking behind this. And so I told her, I was like, that's a gift. And I could just see her being like so happy. But I was being serious. I wasn't trying to make her feel better. I was shocked that one of my lowest students was able to be like, no, this sentence should be broken up here and this should be there, and give me an explanation of why. So after we moved the sentences around, and we even added like the word called. At first we just had, so they are night crawlers, and then we all decided, no, we should have they are called night crawlers. It makes a little bit more sense. And we added another word in there. Then what you can do, you can use the most important words from the most important words. You can choose the very most important words.
Elite group.
Yeah, the top team to create a topic sentence. Then after you make the topic sentence, you can rearrange the words to make a conclusion sentence. Okay? I said use as much scaffolding as needed. For me, I had to write it for my kids. We talked about what a topic sentence is, and I was trying. I highlighted it on the board. We were talking about. I was like, because we were trying to talk about how to make a topic sentence, and I explained to them what it was. I showed them examples from like we were reading about Martin Luther King Jr. and I was like, this is an example of a topic sentence. It's telling your readers what they're going to read about. And so we kind of are talking about it, but I could just really tell they were like, we've never done this before. So I helped them write this one. Pretty much I wrote it. But I was showing them that I just said earthworms are amazing creatures with underground tunnels. I highlighted that. And I was like, that was the most important thing from the first section. Special skin, that was the most important thing from the second section. And characteristics, that was the most important thing from the third section that helped them survive. So I was just kind of trying to help scaffold them of just like, in the topic sentence, you're going to tell your readers what they're reading about. And I was like, guess what, guys, in the conclusion sentence, you kind of use the same words, and they thought that was awesome. So I just said, in conclusion, earthworms are creatures who live in underground tunnels, have special skin, and unique characteristics. So for second grade, like you might have to kind of write that for them, or you might have to help them write it. It might look different in different classrooms. But after we just finished this yesterday, and we're gonna add a title, we decided. But after we did it, I was like, guys, look, like you guys did this. Like you should be so proud of yourselves. We were all like clapping and cheering. But then one of them, she goes, you know, I really didn't like this at first. She's like, but I do now. I do now. And then a lot of the kids were like, yeah, because people like this, never agree. And they're like, yeah, I agree. Like, we didn't like it at first because I was fun. I think it's just because it was making them go to like a deeper level of thinking. And so at first they're like, we don't like this. We don't really know what Hamilton's doing. But I'm always just like, guys, I have a reason why I do this. And so afterwards they were like, wow, this is like really cool to see that we actually did this. So from here, you could highlight the most important word. You could highlight sight word. You could really, highlight the topic sentence, kind of whatever you're needing for your lesson.
Or any given phonics lessons. I mean, you've got digraphs in there of all sorts. You've got quotation marks. You've got, for the 4th and 5th grade people in the group, or the Sarah, you're teaching middle school, high school. You can get into complex sentences and series in a sentence, with a colon that offsets it, and all of those things. And the amazing thing is you'll start to see it in your children's writing. And so don't forget, these are second graders, ELL second graders. And this is what they're coming up with. And that whole idea of audience, message, purpose, that's where this really shines when you get to this step. Who are we writing this for? What do we want to take away from it? What was our purpose? And then that will help you arrange how this needs to look for our audience. So what are you going to do with this step?
We decided I already typed it out for them, and they want to make their own books from it. Like they were like, that'd be so cool if we could add pictures to this, or if we could add more sentences. So I mean, that's one thing that I'm going to do is print it off, because they have like a little folder in their book bag where they can like read our interactive writing pieces. So I'm going to put that in there, and now I'm kind of deciding we might talk more about topic sentences and conclusion sentences, but I also want to put in nouns. That's something else that we have to learn. I haven't really talked about that much. So
they'll learn it doing this.
Yeah.
You know what you can do with those keywords that she wrote on the little cards? You can put those into pocket charts and make that a center where you have to divide them up by nouns and verbs, those other parts of speech. And you'll find that some of them can go in more than one place than another. But that can be an activity you can do at centers, literacy workstations.
That's great.
And then you don't have to.
I was like, I have them in the pocket charts, but I was like, oh, just keep them. I don't know.
Yeah, and it doesn't take extra work. I mean, if there's no prep time, and it's so valuable, and it's going to be conversation embedded, social linguistic learning in action right there. And then don't be afraid just to leave it hanging in the room. All the memory traces of those fabulous conversations are going to come out. Go ahead.
I just have a question.
Yeah.
When did you do this? Like, what part of your day? Did this fit in, or did it fit in multiple parts?
I decide, we talked about some things you're really good at the beginning of the year and some things you're not. I am not very good at being on top of word study, and that was just way too much for me to be like printing stuff out and kind of preparing stuff every week. And so I just put word study into this. Yeah. I used the nonfiction text. I used that as my shared reading instead of like the one. Thankfully, I have more freedom at my school, and like even like in my pod, they were doing a different shared reading thing. And I mean, I didn't like tell them that I was doing this, but I just used that other shared reading part. And so I would do this right after they would come in from specials for our word study.
And I wanted to add to that. I always did mine during content time, social studies or science, but then I could also do it during word work time. And then you could also argue it's during writing time. This is truly an integration of all of your topics, using literacy as your vehicle for all the instruction. So you can be very creative. And you could argue she was doing science, she was doing life cycles, she was doing word work, she was doing conventions of print, she was doing oral language development, she was doing comprehension, she was doing, and the list goes on and on. That's why it's going to be so easy to nail your language arts. That's never the problem. Just look at your content standards first. We need to learn about earthworms, or we need to learn about the life cycle.
And I'm pretty sure for some days I did do it for writing. Like on that day when I said, oh, go write sentences with this, it kind of, I just decided that I was just going to be flexible with this. I mean, I didn't get rid of math, or I didn't get rid of the other things we really had to do, but I just kind of moved some things around, and I was like, I really want to focus my time on this. So some lessons were shorter than others. But.
What other questions do you have?
Where did you find the text? Like, is that something you seen out of a library book or something off the shared?
I got it off of RazKids. Our school thankfully has a subscription to that. So I just searched earthworms on RazKids, and then I just found the Level M book, turned to that page, and I did the little like the camera thing on the smart board. You click the little camera icon, and you just like click. I'm so terrible, but you know what I mean. And then like puts the picture over there into the smart board. So I got it from RazKids. But
ReadWorks, I don't know if you guys have heard of that, but it's like free, and it's really good for like shared reading. So they have tons of articles on there.
ReadWorks, and it's free.
It's great. They have just like tons of articles, like articles of the day. You can search passages, all grade levels, even up to high school.
And it's for shared readings. Did you hear that, Sarah? It's even for high school. ReadWorks.
ReadWorks.org.
ReadWorks.org.
You have to sign up for it, but it's free. And there's like so many resources. So if you guys don't have RazKids, That would be
Yeah.
another good place to find.
What other questions do you have? I mean, you're not gonna get this anywhere else, so this is the time to ask questions.
How long would you spend on each day? Like 20 minutes?
Yeah.
Until they would like lose focus.
It depends. Some of my kids can sit on carpet for a very long time. Some of them couldn't. And so I'd be like, all right, stand up and talk to your partner. Or, you know, it just depended on how long I wanted to stay there. But I usually gave us about 20 to 45 minutes for us. I try to give them a lot of talk, turn and talk. It just depended on what I was doing that day. If I just noticed that they were getting really, really antsy, I'd be like, all right, we got through one sentence, we got one word, and we'd move on. So it kind of just depends on how long your kids can stay on carpet. Mine usually can't stay very long. So I would have to kind of break it up sometimes. But it was usually I would try to give about 20 to at least 30 minutes.
Bridget, I can see using the Spanish, the paragraph of Spanish. Think about it. I'll help you when you of course, she just got married on us last week. They do that. One of the questions we have.
They do. I think Brittany does one.
Brittany.
Overall, it took you a long time. How did you keep doing it just after a while?
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, that's the thing. It's like, I mean, I had one of my kids. I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm so annoyed of you. I was like, guys, like, look how much we've done. Like, we're almost done with this. And I was like, all we have to do now is like write this last sentence for this last section. He was like, good, then we won't have to do it anymore. And I was just like, turn away. All right. So some kids, like, they're gonna kind of gripe and complain about it, but then they were the same ones who were arguing for the most important words. So it's just kind of like one of those things where you're like, all right, you can be mad and upset about it, but like, we're gonna do math. We're gonna do whatever.
And think if we're thinking together and talking together, emotions are the gateway to the intellect. And we as human creatures can't help ourselves if that's going on. Real thinking and real talking. Now, you don't do it 24 hours a day, but I would say do an interactive editing for at least one activity for every unit. Because if you really want them to have a deep understanding of the topics, and then this will also help test taking. You could also turn it around and do some activities that way. Go ahead.
Can I just, okay. One thing I noticed, like going back to that question, is when my kids, when we're writing something, they always get super excited when it's like for an audience, going back to the AMP. So like I was gonna ask you if you guys decided or like it would be a cool idea to show that to like another class or even to have like an administrator that they think is like cool or whatever to come and like observe you guys. That way they keep interest, at least in kindergarten, because they think that's super exciting.
Yeah,
Someone else.
that's a great idea because it really does kind of give them that purpose.
And then you could turn it into a play, Reader's Theater, act it out, be the earthworm or something.
Love that. I don't think my voice can handle it, but
Yeah, write a new script, teach them that, the conventions of playwriting. The sky is the limit for what you can do. And yeah, don't be too concerned that they're going to get bored. These were my methods all the way through. As long as they're thinking and they are learning, they stay with you. Apart from thunderstorms and things that happen, you know.
yeah, some days I would just look out and they're all just like, I was like, all right, guys. Like, so some days it's like you kind of just you do what you can. Some of my lessons I'd be like, all right, we're spending 10 minutes on this, and like they're not, the thunderstorms or there was like a pep rally or whatever. It's like, okay, we'll just come back to it after specials. Let's try it again. And I would even tell them that sometimes. I'm like, oh man, I see no one's listening, so I'm just gonna start over on the lesson. And I would start over. So it just, you kind of like, it's just like listen to you. Just kind of do what you can. Some days the kids are just not gonna be there, but I mean, like I said, the same kids who were like, this is boring or whatever, then at the end, they were like, wow, like, I actually know a lot about earthworms and I actually like it now. So.
And what are they doing otherwise? What is it we're doing in our classroom to meet these standards otherwise too? And I had students that would start coming to me after we started doing these kinds of things. In first grade, I remember the first time Latina came to me and said, I'm tired. Because she just wasn't used to thinking. We don't have our kids thinking.
I just came from a conference last week, and it was a conference around learning to teach. And one of the things that I am so thrilled to see that our teachers are implementing and learning, and again,
She's our first-year teacher.
This is incredible, because this was part of the concentration of the conference was how do we get new teachers to do this kind of depth of thinking with their students and using text. It was all around how do we use text to even make what they call equity, equal playing field for your students. So while your students may have this background information, they talked a little bit more, push back around why the time that we spend with pre-reading isn't as important as delving into the text and using the text, because when you spend all this time around, well, what did you learn or what do you think, you're going further away from the text, and you are pulling in different thoughts that don't really necessarily align with the text and what you want your students to learn. But when you delve into and use the text as your grounds, you are equalizing the playing fields for your students so that they don't have to, one group of students have this set of knowledge and another student, but you're giving them an equalized playing field so that they all have the knowledge, or you're working through the knowledge together. And so I've often thought about this idea of demographics and individualized instruction, and how, yeah, that's important, but it's also important when you have ELL students in your classroom, and students with special needs in your classroom, gifted students in your classroom, how you can bring that all together and really make deep learning happen as a result of equalizing that playing field for your students by using the text as your grounded piece for learning. So I was really thoroughly impressed that you were doing this, and just thinking about equity in your classroom. I totally different thought in terms of equity as it relates to our students in our classes. So
Equal opportunities.
yeah.
Great. Yeah, it makes me even think. I had like one of my GATE students. He was like, "Yeah, well, earthworms also," and he started going off on. I was like, "Hold on." I was like, "Does I say that in text?" It's like, because we can't put that in the writing. So I still kind of let them share their thoughts. But again, it was like, all right, like I know you know a lot about everything, but we're talking about this text. So I love him, but I was like, okay, nope, we're not talking about that. We're not on the rabbit trail. So that is a very good point. And now looking back, I'm like, that's so true. Like every one of my students was able to be like, well, the text says this, and it kind of becomes their own knowledge. I guess like a way that I even kind of think of this, and this might be like totally wrong, but I think about, if you think of like the New King James Version or King James Version, like the Bible, I almost think of like the interactive editing as like the Message version. Like you take the most important words, you take the meaning, but then you kind of put it into your own words, you kind of put it into your own thoughts.
Transforming knowledge. Remember, student teachers interact in our writing class. We talked about transforming knowledge and the power of that. That's what she was just describing, and that's what this is also doing.
Yeah. I wonder how many of your not in readers are going to be moving out levels now because
I told them, I actually just had a meeting yesterday that it was like for like the 9 weeks thing. And for all of my kids, except for my ones who are already on level, every single student moved up at least one level from the last 9 weeks. Like, it really is like the grace of God, but I mean, also it's so cool to have these kind of tools. And I think that's just what kind of clicked for me, because Laura Latta, she's at my school, and she did interactive editing for me at the beginning of the year and kind of modeled it. And I was like, oh, that's great. And I never went back to it because I was like, I don't know how to do it. And like, I have too much to do already. Like I have Project Lead the Way and all this other stuff. And I think, but then one day I ran into Dr. Martin and Laura again, and they kind of brought it up. And Laura was like, oh, are you doing interactive editing? And I was like, no. And it wasn't guilt, but it was just like, you know what? Like, this is my first year. I've already failed at so many things. Like, let me just try. It was like this really is kind of the year where I'm just like, I'm just gonna try this. And like, you know, I even had a teacher kind of be like, what are you doing? Like, you walk in, like, what even is that? And I was just like, oh, it's just this thing I learned at my school. Like, I'm just trying it. And so I think that's, you really have that freedom, like during your first year, to kind of, I mean, at least thankfully, I do at my school. I'm just gonna be like, all right, try it. And if I fall flat on my face, like the kids don't know. And like, it was just really nice and like refreshing just to be able to be like, all right, we're gonna go into this. And I just focused on the next day. I wasn't like, all right, for the next 2 weeks, these are my like end goals. I was like, okay, what do I teach today? What do I do tomorrow? Like, what do I need to get ready for? So some days really do look like that. But I feel like that this kind of teaching really makes it easier for you. And it really makes it easier for the kids because it's not a whole lot of prep work. It's like, all right, the text is here. Let's talk about it and let's make something from it.
You chose the M is what they're supposed to be at, and then so
At the
you
end
chose
of the
that
year.
level
Yeah.
because of that.
Well, and I also just
Or-
chose it because, yeah, I chose level M because I was like, okay, they're supposed to be there at the end of the year, so like, might as well do it. And I mean, whenever I read it, I was like, okay, it's not, too extremely difficult. And I feel like it had more like meat in it. It kind of had like more information for us to work with.
But don't be afraid to write your own.
Mm-hmm.
But I will tell you, when I started writing my own, I used to tell my students, I'd be like, I wrote this for you.
Yeah.
Well, after we've been doing this for a while, I quit telling them because they come in and start reading the shared reading, they're like, who wrote this? This doesn't hang together. So, I mean, they get to be really savvy readers doing this kind of thing. So I quit telling them when I wrote it. And they're like, oh, really?
I wonder why they did that.
I know. Who would have written that? I didn't lie, but I just didn't do that.
And that's what I'm kind of like even thinking about like for the next time we do this. I mean, there's pros and cons for having it just on the smart board, but I think that's why I had them write it out on sentence strips. That way they can have it like they can go up and touch it, they can see it anytime that they want it. And I'm going to give them a copy of it so they can have it in their reading folder. So that way it's not just on the smart board.
Very tangible. And I would really encourage you with your interactive writing and your interactive editing, keep those hanging up around the room. Those are the memory traces to all the great deep conversations you've had. And that's why the smart board, I'm not so big on interactive writing on smart board because then when you take it away, there went all your memory traces for all those conversations you've had. So, any other questions for Brittany? You know where I live, and if you've got her email because she's on our list.
Yeah, if you guys want this slides, I might have it on Google Photos. It has like the step-by-step, kind of like the process with pictures. So if anyone wants that, like you guys can see me afterwards and I can send it to you or so.
Didn't she do a good job?
Yeah.
She's a natural. So that leads me into my next segue. It looks like we have most